Good afternoon, everybody, and a very warm welcome to our session this afternoon. It's great to be back for what is session number 4 and actually the final part of this particular series. And I have the absolute pleasure to be in the company of Colleen Theron, Rory Oak, and new to our group, but well known to me, Mayuresh Deshkar. So welcome, everybody. Colleen, please, do you want to kick us off with the introductions?
Thanks, Vicky, and it's been such a pleasure. This is our 4th webinar, so we've been working together in putting the series together, and Vicky has been our moderator. So my name is Colleen Theron, and it's a delight to be here. I am a tri-qualified lawyer and the founder of ADIA International. We are a specialist and purpose-led consultancy, focusing on business and human rights and sustainability. We have a particular expertise around forced labor and modern slavery issues. And we work supporting businesses to meet their legal obligations and to develop best practice standards and procedures. And we'll be talking a bit more about that today. So thank you, Vicky.
Super, thanks, Colleen. Rory, would you do us the pleasure of introducing yourself again, please?
Yep, thanks, Vicky. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rory Oak. I'm a senior consultant with ADIA. I'm a lawyer by background, and I've been with ADIA for just under 7 years. And I work with clients across different sectors on human rights and sustainability due diligence, particularly supporting them with that move from policies and commitments into more practical implementation of due diligence. So really looking forward to discussing all of that today.
Super. Thank you, Rory. And for the first time, actually, welcome, Mayuresh. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mayuresh Deshkar. Glad to be a part of this discussion. Basically, I'm an electrical engineer, did my master's in sustainability, more than 11 years of work experience in sustainability advisory, assurance service solutions, working here in Bureau Veritas as principal consultant for sustainability team. Glad to be a part of this discussion and look forward to have nice insights. Thank you.
We're happy you could join us, Mayuresh. Thank you, team. Okay, so some of you may have been able to join all 3 sessions so far, and if so, you'll realise that we've focused on kind of the planning, the checking, the doing around supply chain and human rights due diligence. This session, actually, as the close, is a little bit different because this is about thinking about how do we test and check and verify that what we are doing and what's in our strategy is actually working. So things like closing the loop, verifying it could be assurance, which is Mayuresh's world, but also very linked to continuous improvement. So we're seeing this firsthand. The guys have got real world experience, and what we're going to do is spend 40 to 45 minutes. I'm going to shoot some questions through. But before I do that, actually, Colleen, we've been part of all 4 sessions together, which has been super fun. What should companies be doing, in your opinion, experience? What have been some of the key themes that companies should think about as we start to sort of think about the summary of what we've talked about?
Yeah, thank you, Vicky. And such a big question to be answered in a couple of minutes, really. I think reflecting on the last 3 sessions, and also I want to do some reflection on what we're seeing in practice, is that we see this shift that's needed from moving from intent to implementation. So as part of the first part of this series, we were looking at the plan element, and we're seeing a lot of companies making some progress around their policies, identifying their risks, their commitments. But what we really have been focusing on in this session beyond the planning is, what is happening actually on the ground? Are we seeing if companies are making real progress from their plan phase? So looking at the do phase, how much are they embedding due diligence into their procurement, their decision making? In the check phase, how are they focusing their shift to whether actions are effective? I think that we're seeing that a lot of companies and businesses have various tools of their own, whether that's using audit as a tool, whether they have particular data tools. They obviously refer to reporting frameworks, whether those are legal or voluntary reporting standards. And the reality is that what needs to happen, and this is particularly true for where we're moving in today in the act side of things, is, how are these different tools, how are these different decisions and planning interconnected so that you are driving better decisions over time, that you are actually doing more in terms of your actions so that you have systems that are appropriately matched to your commitments, that you have proper outcomes, and that you have accountability. And actually, just on a practical side, if I can reflect, what I'm seeing a lot in companies at the moment is that there are things taking place. But I feel that when it comes to human rights and human rights due diligence, particularly, is there's a helicopter, taking that helicopter look, taking that strategic view that is really still needing a lot of attention, because there needs to be drawing together what a business wants to achieve and who's going to be accountable for it, so that all of these different elements around plan, do, check, act become practical and effective.
Yeah, it's and it's being able to demonstrate that, isn't it? It's one thing sort of having a document or a policy or a strategy, but actually being able to demonstrate that it's working is the key point. Thanks, Colleen. That's really interesting. Colleen, I'm going to stay with you just for a second, if that's all right. We've talked a lot about monitoring in most of the sessions, actually, but what does it mean to actually act on that information through your lens?
Yeah, and that's a great question. So, and I think, again, going back to practice, and what I'm hearing a lot from different organizations, sustainability professionals, whether or legal or procurement professionals, is that they are grappling with that point of how do we do this. So in practice, we've identified the risk, we've decided to prioritize an issue, we took specific actions, here's what's changed as a result. And that is what you need to be moving from, is like once you've identified a problem, is actually moving into concrete actions. So if you are or have an audit and grievance procedures and for suppliers in different regions, how are you monitoring the trends that are coming from that? Can those trends, can the monitoring be fed into specific actions? If you have decided to engage with suppliers, what does that look like? What are the outcomes from it? What does your engagement plan even look like? So, we want to take actions. How specific are those actions? And allocating more resource to particular risk where you have identified what you've seen as a problem in a particular area or within your own operations. So it's really about taking your data and turning it into something that is actionable and that is also defensible, because I think we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that what we are seeing, and it might not be touching every company, but we are seeing more scrutiny, we are seeing more legal liability, we are seeing more issues cropping up around companies that don't have defensible systems in place. I'll stop there, Vicky.
No, I was absolutely agreeing with you, thinking about the clients that I work with. You're totally right. There's a real spotlight, rightly so, actually. There's a real spotlight on, being able to demonstrate that you are, taking the duty of care responsibly, I guess. So, Colleen, interesting. Myresh, can I ask you for your thoughts around this topic?
Sure. So I would like to quote an example of double materiality assessment. So this is process-based outcome where we need to plan things, but in terms of informed decision or implementation of the concepts, this act phase is very important because from the advisory and assurance perspective, because you need to understand which stakeholders need to play what role, informed decision making, need to have all plans to implement for risk and opportunity identification, scoring methodologies, and also the assurance part of it, which will be verification and review of your scores, methodology, how you're implementing everything, and end result will be how you're publishing the outcome of double materiality assessment. So all in all, act phase is really important from demonstration, implementation, and timely decision making for publishing your disclosures.
And actually using the data as the tool
Yeah.
to guide those decisions, right? So it doesn't feel as though it's random or it's, you know, from a source of guessing almost. You know, using that data is really important, isn't it, to kind of focus in on the highest priorities.
Yes,
Okay.
definitely.
Super. Thanks, Myresh. Really interesting. Rory, let me come to you. Clear communication is this is a big talking point, isn't it? What is clear to one may not be to another. What does that look like, and how should companies think about how they communicate when they're considering different types and levels of stakeholders?
Yeah, I think to me, good communication is really about how you show you're working in your communications and disclosures, rather than just presenting activities that look or sound good. We have this statistic on the screen from the World Benchmarking Alliance showing that less than a quarter of companies disclose names and locations of significant suppliers. And I think this is really relevant because it shows that a massive minority of companies are giving stakeholders the full picture. So they're not given much context behind the disclosures and the actions that businesses are talking about. And that means that they can't necessarily draw their own conclusions about whether those headline actions that they're seeing are appropriate for the level of risk, or, you know, appropriate for what the supply chain looks like. So in practice, I think it's about being clear about what risks you've prioritized and why you've chosen to prioritize them, as Colleen mentioned, where you've taken actions, but also, you know, transparency about the challenges that you still face as well. So rather than saying we audited 100 suppliers and that's great, the type of disclosure that we always encourage clients to make would be more along the lines of, you know, we've identified excessive overtime specifically as a risk. We've prioritized suppliers in this particular region. Here's what we've done. We've implemented corrective actions, but we're still seeing challenges due to production pressures, for example. And I think that level of transparency builds a lot more credibility and makes it a lot clearer for any audience, any group of stakeholders to understand what's actually happening. And of course, that can then, you know, you mentioned targeting different groups, that can be tailored depending on the audience. Like, for example, you might be trying to communicate with investors who will be more focused on how you're managing risk and what your governance looks like. Regulators will focus naturally on evidence of compliance. And then you've got workers who are interested in what's actually changing in practice for them. But just one last point I will say is that tailoring is only ever going to work if you really understand what each of those groups is looking for in the first place, and that the only way you can do that is by engaging those stakeholders and understanding their interests.
And Rory, by that you mean the drivers for the various stakeholders. Why are they interested? Why are they involved? Is that what you mean by that comment?
Yeah, absolutely. So what information are they most interested in? What are their priorities? And then you can tailor your communications depending on that.
Okay. So that's the starting point, isn't it? Is who's involved to do what and what are their drivers? Okay, that's an important point, and possibly one we overlook a little bit.
Yeah, definitely.
Possibly. Myresh, when it comes to reporting, what are your thoughts on this topic of communication? It's an important one, isn't it?
Definitely. And in agreement with Rory, I just wanted to add a few more points on good communication or good reporting. So first point will definitely be on knowledge. Whatever be your reporting regulation or framework or template or any specific requirement from any global framework or regulation, you need to understand what is the ask, what sort of reporting requirements are there, what kind of expectation is there, whether we can have mandatory reporting, voluntary reporting. That will definitely give us right picture of prioritization, what topics we need to understand, how we need to report, what will be the time frame or reporting timelines. Next thing is definitely the alignment, because all the companies, sector experts, subject matter experts, they will need to understand what systems we have currently, what sort of documents, tools. Nowadays we have AI and other resources. So are we aligned with that reporting requirement, which are already there in the sustainability market? And then the next part will be how we are reporting, what sort of data points we need to report or give justice to that reporting framework, and the transparency in terms of giving the right disclosures at right time.
We were never going to get through this series without talking about AI, right? It's I think we could have a whole separate series about that, but I think it's an important point, isn't it, Myresh? Which kind of leads me into actually another question that I had is the confidence for companies around their data is so important. You know, before people want or indeed can communicate this, they have to have that confidence, right? Why is that? Let me start there, and then I've got a second part to my question. That's it for you, Myresh, actually. Just the question around
Sure.
the confidence in data and why assurance is becoming so important. What role does it play?
So definitely, first point is on de-risking. So if you are giving any specific information, be it quantitative or qualitative, you need to understand what sort of risks are associated with that particular disclosure. So risk related to inaccurate reporting or unreliable sort of information, if you are disclosing to your stakeholders, then definitely those points you need to encounter through the third party assurance. Also, there are different procedures through which we try to de-risk the whole disclosures which are going in public domain. So if you can see it on screen, which is like verification, reviews, audit, validation, assurance, inspection, testing. So these are different terms we generally use as a part of procedure in assurance, and it has a specific different meaning attached to it. So when we generally talk about verification process, it's all about how you are reviewing your quantitative disclosures or data related procedures. And verification also will have a checklist based approach, while validation is all of related to process based. So will this method be appropriate? What my procedures are into? Are they accurate in terms of giving me the right disclosures? And assurance is an umbrella kind of procedures with reference to the opinion or a conclusion, where we generally review the subject matter or the report against a specific assurance standard, and then we provide our conclusion or opinion on that particular key performance indicator or scope of assurance. But all in all, this whole process is for de-risking, continuous improvement, because companies which are into this business of assurance or they are in this journey of verification, they generally seek help or support on how they do continuous improvement in their disclosures, trend analysis to align with new regulations or framework. So yeah, assurance is something which is more of this sort.
It's interesting because I often get asked, you know, the value of, you know, third party assurance. And that's kind of what we're talking about, isn't it? Is building that confidence and that impartiality. Colleen, when we listen to Myresh there about communication and the value of assurance and that kind of thing, what are your thoughts around this topic? I know you feel quite strongly about this.
Yes, thanks. And actually, just on a point of which you know people may or may not be aware of, but with the implementation of CS3D, there is a verification aspect to it, which hasn't, the guidelines haven't yet been released as to, you know, what third-party verification looks like under those particular regulations. But I think it's important to note, because what that means is obviously it's that move towards greater accountability that is underwritten by a third-party expert that is actually recognized, which again goes to the point of, you know, to your question, you know, why is assurance so important when it comes to stress testing your due diligence system? And from a due diligence point of view, it's that test to demonstrate, have you identified risks and how have you done that? What is your system? What are the decisions you have made? You know, is that based on evidence-based data? What is your methodology to undertake this? You know, are your actions effective? And actually, we see this all the time. You know, if you read across modern slavery statements, which is, you know, something that as a bread and butter for us, we really use our indicators to assess what companies are disclosing on. Very often, you know, when they are making statements, which when you unpick that as part of helping a business strengthen their approach, they don't have the systems, or they have the systems, they're not integrated and they haven't been documented. And so documenting your systems is important not only for your legal risk mitigation, because of course, if anybody comes after you, if it's a regulator, a third party, a class action, the only defense a business has is what have they documented around their decisions and their risk making. So it's important not only for legal purposes, but actually from a practical commercial perspective.
Absolutely.
It's really important because it shows accountability. It demonstrates your governance systems. It demonstrates that you are keeping records. It builds in roles and responsibilities, and it ensures that there is a program that is roadmapped and that you can point to meeting your strategy and your objectives. So I think, in short, assurance is really about, for a business, ensuring that your legal and your commercial objectives are being met if you are going to be developing a human rights due diligence program, for example.
And it's interesting, Colin, I think back to, so for people listening who joined session 2 with David Croft, you may remember a really strong example David shared with us where there was a very, very large firm actually who was in a continuous cycle of auditing, etc., but they were seeing very little improvement. Yeah, so there was frustration building, there was questions around the value of doing these audits. And the reality comes back to the points that, Myresh, Rory and Colleen are talking about here, which is you've got to stress test it. Yeah, auditing alone is not enough. We talked about it earlier in our series. Auditing alone is one step. What we're talking about here and what Colleen is kind of alluding to is actually there's lots around the audit program that helps you to stress test what you're doing here. So I totally agree, Colleen. Thank you for sharing that. Myresh, I want to come back to you on a point actually that I've had in my mind. So we've talked a lot about planning and implementation, monitoring. What for you comes next and why?
Yes. So just to start from previous point, which we were talking about, what is assurance or what is audit and why it is required. So definitely, one thing is something. So this whole process of assurance or validation or verification is not fault finding, but to support clients or companies to strengthen their disclosures. Another thing is traceability is a big factor. When we disclose any specific information or when we are trying to adopt any new regulations or reporting frameworks, we need to understand how clients or sectors are having traceability for information which they are publishing. So this traceability stands for all the systems, procedures, data accuracy, reliability point of view, what sort of tools they are using, how fine-tuning kind of thing they are doing with their tools, because every now and then we are seeing new modifications are coming, new regulations are coming, or they are getting some delays or anything. So based on the stakeholder expectation, market expectation, are they standing on the ground and giving right justice to those particular disclosures or reporting frameworks? Another point is a big issue is on data quality, because data are generally getting generated through different modes, communication channels, but they need to also understand how they are ensuring the quality of information, whether it is estimation based or calculation based or measurement based, and how they are keeping track of all the evidence records so that everything will be reliable, accurate, balanced kind of information they need to provide. And it is important for all sort of communication, whether it is in their sustainability or ESG report, due diligence audits or report, or risk assessments. These days, all the rating agencies, which they are expecting us to provide submissions or answers to their questions. So yes, in all aspect, assurance is something which is getting momentum.
And it's that link, isn't it, Myresh? It's that link to say, actually,
Yes.
we've identified that there's a specific action regarding maybe a supplier. And actually, this is why we've done this thing. It's explaining that link that's often so important, isn't it?
Definitely.
Okay. Colleen, I'm going to come back to you for a second, actually. So how can companies use reporting assurance, not just to be compliant, not just to tick that box and say we're doing the thing we're asked to do, but how can they use what we're talking about to actually improve the due diligence approach?
Yeah, and I think that's, Vicky, the point you've just made there is such a critical one, that this isn't just about compliance. It is really about, what do you do to improve your performance? How does this underpin return of investment? I think we're coming to that a little bit later on. What does this look like in terms of actually strengthening your business approach? And really, for us, what we see, it's not just about how you collect the evidence, although I have to pause there and say it's important to think about what evidence you are collecting. So we've seen that too often as well, is that, an example was working with a particular organization who wanted to set up a new sort of supplier screening, where they were, I think if I'm right, Rory, there were about 150 questions going out across the themes. And of course, they were then surprised why nobody was answering those questions. Now, data is valuable, but you've got to think about how you present that and what your outcomes you want from the data. And that is really critical in how you design your due diligence system. What are the critical questions you want to ask? What's the evidence? Because what you want to take from that is to be able to stand back and say, what patterns are we seeing? What are we consistently seeing that isn't meeting our objectives or even our legal requirements? What are the things that we need to improve? So, if multiple issues are coming, if the same issues coming up across multiple jurisdictions or suppliers, then there's a really important question is to ask, why is this happening? Does it actually relate to our business model? Do we need to be looking at whether our purchasing practices have to be revised? Do we have to do something about our capacity building, where people put this at the forefront perhaps of some of the executive or board agendas because of the risks that may be involved? So it's, looking at ensuring that what is happening with your data doesn't get reviewed in an isolated way. It's also the interconnectedness. What are the patterns? What are the feedback loops? How are you ensuring that it's feeding directly into your risk prioritization and how you measure your impact? I can speak for it on Ever, so let me stop right there.
But we often get engaged on materiality, double materiality. What is it that is, relevant to my business? How relevant? How important should this be? And it's a really good place to start, isn't it? Because otherwise you end up. I mean, I don't believe there's such a thing as overly compliant. I don't believe in that term, but you can carry out activities, in a way that isn't great value. So understanding that materiality, Colleen, I totally agree, is so important.
And actually, all the CS3D, all the laws, and actually even Company Act reporting is very much around risk prioritization. So but to do that, you need to be able to defend your methodology. How have you got to your risk prioritization, and then how do you act on that? Because we know, if you're dealing with global companies who've got thousands of suppliers, you simply can't address everything in the same way. But it's how you make the practical step of ensuring that you have these consistent feedback loops and that you have cross-functional and not siloed operations to be able to bring the data and the information and the trends back to the people that make the decisions on how you're going to address the issues.
Totally agree. That linkage again, isn't it? That linkage between teams and the context is, it separates a good audit program from a great audit program. Completely agree, Colleen. Myresh, let me come to you. You're heavily involved, particularly now. It's very busy in the assurance world, isn't it? It's quite seasonal. But how can companies use findings from the work that your team do to kind of build that value and pull that through into other areas? What are you thinking about?
Yes, so these days the assurance process is quite value addition based, because whenever we complete any assurance engagement, we generally provide our recommendations based on what we observed throughout the process. And these observations or recommendations are really important to fine tune their existing systems or to develop the entirely new system to align with the reporting requirements. When we say that, okay, there are certain conditions or observations or recommendations which need to be considered. So that is something which they generally map through the time horizon. So short-term, medium-term, and long-term sort of roadmap, they generally try to understand from their priority of strategy, and accordingly, they try to implement these recommendations. As we are rightly discussing that value addition, traceability, or continuous improvement, these are heavily focused areas for assurance in today's scenario. And we always seek that support from companies that, okay, these are your systems, these are your data points or control evaluation. And then accordingly, we try to support them through these audits. It's not just the fault finding, but yeah, trying to understand their disclosures and help them to grow in their assurance journey or strategy.
Interesting. Colleen, I want to come back to you, and I don't know whether this is your comfort zone, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Obviously, everybody who joins these kind of sessions, that, you know, the people I'm presenting with today, we do these things because we want to do less or no significant harm, right? We know that, you know, one world. But is there are there things that people can use in their business or be thinking about to demonstrate and talk about the wider return on investment? I don't necessarily mean pounds and pence exclusively, but what do you think about when you think about the wider return on investment?
Yeah, so another webinar to be held separately, I think. I mean, you know, I'm sure that for many people listening, they hear the words over and over. This is about the, you know, risk reduction. We want to reduce our risk. What does that actually mean? And I think, you know, just on that point, there are two things that come to mind immediately in terms of risk reduction. Actually, three things. One is what I said previously, is that actually to mitigate your risk, should there be a legal claim, you want appropriate reporting, you want appropriate systems in place. So you have this risk reduction around potential legal claims. Now, again, many companies will think, well, that's not really going to hit us. We are not a Shell, we're not a BP, we're not, you know, which we've seen a lot of, you know, more recent cases in UK and Netherlands courts at parent company level. But Dyson has just, you know, faced litigation, which led to an out of court settlement around migrant workers being abused in a Malaysian supplier for them. So not, you know, the case wasn't even brought against the Malaysian company, it was brought against Dyson as the parent company to be heard in the UK Supreme Court. So as a broader risk piece, there's the legal piece, but I don't really want to just hone in on the legal side. I think that, you know, the broader, what I see in practice, the broader business case around improved systems, improved due diligence, acting properly is actually operational efficiencies. You know, very often as you perhaps undertake a maturity assessment around where you are, you start being able to look at, you know, how can people in the business work more collaboratively, more efficiently. Maybe you might find that, you know, certain roles can be integrated. So operational efficiency is something that we come across. I think it goes without saying that there's the reputational aspect, like with Dyson that I just mentioned, not just the legal, but the reputational piece. And then, of course, two things that I've seen as quite big drivers, or three actually, for how improved systems bring value to companies is around actually improved benchmarking. So if you are appearing on benchmarks, whether at the World Benchmark Alliance, the CCLA, World Modern Slavery Benchmark, how do I improve my scores, or around ISS? And we've had evidence for working with some of our clients, how we've improved their scoring, how that's led to better investments or better or more interest from investors as to how they're actually doing that. We've seen improved scoring around EcoVadis, which is becoming a market driver for many companies. They're being asked to do EcoVadis scoring. Now, I wouldn't say that EcoVadis equates to effective due diligence for human rights, but it certainly is one of the tools you can look at. And, you know, it certainly can help. And then I think that, the broader issues are, how's this helping feed into your resilience? What is your competitiveness? How many buyers are asking for standards that you can actually produce in response to their own question sets, that you can show that you have appropriate systems in place. And I just very briefly, there is a recent report from the UNDP, which focuses on the business case around human rights. And interestingly, they have reported that there's, definitely now a correlation between long-term operational gains from stronger human rights due diligence, which is outweighing that initial cost of investment. And then just two more things: stronger supplier relationships, better employee engagement. And I'll stop there. It's a really interesting topic. Just this particular element.
Yeah. Colleen, listen, I absolutely, I see this in real life. I totally align with what you're talking about here. And, there's so much around getting supply chain management, human rights effectiveness. There's so much around this. The core of this is we do no significant harm. Of course it is. But there are so much to think about that makes this a sensible investment, to get this right. And I think you've really brought that to life, which is super. All right, listen, what I'm going to do, we're going to go through, with this being the final series, I'm going to head over to the guys in a sec for some final thoughts, and we're going to do that in a slightly different way. But just a reminder to our audience, you do have a Q&A function. The chat function is disabled, but you are able to use the Q&A function. If you've got any questions for Rory, Myresh or Colleen, you're welcome to use that, and we'll take as many of those as we can before we close down. So just a reminder that is an opportunity for you. I'm going to do this differently expert panel. So I want to think about key actions. We've talked about so much across the 4 series, and, we'll talk about how people get access to all of that afterwards. But I want to think about this. We have had a range of companies join us, very transparently, some at the very beginning of their journey, some reasonably confident, in a bit of a rhythm, and then some who feel quite advanced and mature. So I want to come to you individually, actually, around final thoughts. What do you think these companies should be thinking about? Rory, I'd love to come to you about that sort of firm that are perhaps doing this for the first time, or they would consider themselves a beginner in the area that we're talking about. What are some of the things that you would say are the key takeaways or the immediate steps one of those firms could take here?
Yeah, I'd say for companies just starting out, my main point would be to just focus on keeping things as simple and targeted as possible at the start. I think the first step is really just to understand where your biggest risks are without trying to address absolutely everything at once, because you don't need a perfect system immediately. But what you do really need is a basic view of which parts of your supply chain, or maybe which issues matter the most, which you can then start to build a plan around. And then secondly, once you've done that, I'd say start putting in place a small number of very practical actions. Could be something small like a supplier code of conduct, or starting to engage with some of your key suppliers, or maybe even just going back and actually reviewing existing audit findings that you have, as opposed to, trying to spread as far as possible and commissioning more and more audits. I think on the flip side, as a third and final one, I would say to start building some basic internal processes as well. So that could be something as simple as just assigning responsibility for follow-ups with suppliers, or having more structured regular check-ins on key risks. So I'd say it's all about making it a step-by-step prioritized plan to avoid that overwhelm or being too thinly spread, because some of the questions that we've had throughout the series have had that theme coming through with them. We're a small business, we can't audit absolutely everyone, what do we do? And they feel a bit frozen in that. But I think just to really emphasize that, take it one piece at a time and prioritize your biggest risks and go from there.
It could feel quite intimidating, right? I mean, not necessarily only for small businesses, but when you hear the amount of things that people are considering, the intimidation and the where do I start is a real blocker, isn't it, Rory, for some firms? So I think it's absolutely. Really good advice.
Sometimes even more so for the bigger ones, because they almost don't want to sort of look under that rock because they're so scared of the scale of what they'll find.
But unfortunately, ignorance gets us nowhere in this scenario.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you're right, actually, because, often we think, well, smaller companies might find this difficult, even more daunting to the big firms that would be under the spotlight. Rory, super helpful. Thank you for those thoughts. Myresh, I'm going to come to you for I'm an intermediate. I'm reasonably confident. I'm doing some things, but I probably haven't shot 100 holes through it to see if it really stands up. So I'm that intermediate firm. What would you say are your key takeaways to that element of our audience?
Sure. So 3 things. One is first and foremost, which is objective of your communication, disclosure, or even for that matter, the assurance. Because again, if you are an intermediate company, you will have certain set of things already done. Like you must have done your baselining, strategy, risk identification, prioritization of those risks, or even to certain extent, mitigation approach must be defined. So now this is the time when you need to understand what you need to do in future, like how you want to how you want to set up your objective in terms of disclosures, what more you need to add in your existing systems, procedures, or data related disclosures. Is there anything which you need to focus on as a new perspective in terms of data management system or procedures, or developing any specific policies to address new risk identified in your business due to existing geopolitical scenarios or sector related issues? So that is one thing, objective setting. Another thing is on readiness for the assurance. This is something which is a very crucial part, where every year companies need to understand, are we ready to have this sort of assurance, verification, validation procedures?
Yeah,
Because
true.
assurance standards are changing, their requirements are getting revised, subject matters are getting deviations in terms of new additions or new regulations are coming. So every now and then we generally ask our existing clients, new clients, or renewal clients that, are you ready for the assurance? Is it something which you haven't considered so far? These are few things or new things which you need to consider. Just try to check with your stakeholders, internal stakeholders, external stakeholders, suppliers, that are we having right systems in place? Are we having right inputs to provide to the third party verifier? And accordingly, we can then proceed with the red flags or green flags in the assurance process. And the last bit will be on value addition point again, which is like, every year, if you are doing it, or you are an intermediate company where you have already considered assurance piece, what value add you are doing every year, or compared to previous years. If you just do trend analysis, have you incrementally grown in the assurance journey? Or if you are not doing that, what additional things you need to do as part of act things, so that you can be better prepared for your future training years, or your reporting disclosures in terms of target setting or goal achieving, etc.
And Myresh, it's interesting because I know your team are often fairly busy with, please tell me if I've got this wrong, but readiness assessment and gap analysis. They're often working with clients in this intermediate phase around that, aren't they? So it's something that your team are quite able to support with. All right, super. Good. Colleen, our tri-qualified lawyer. I am now I am super confident. I've done everything I can possibly do. I will not fall foul of any legal requirements. I need no support at all. What are you asking me to think about?
I had 3 points written down, and then I was listening to Myresh and Rory, and I was thinking, actually, I don't even know if I want to look at those 3 points, because I knew you're going to come back with something different. I mean, it's really interesting. Rory actually alluded to the point that actually for small companies, there's this big question of, how do I prioritize this? What do I do? Where do I go? And said that actually it's probably the same for big companies. I actually think that overconfidence is a problem, because I feel that there are certain companies that absolutely have got things sewn up, and they're not many of them, where they're very integrated, where we see it in their reporting and their thought leadership and where they are. But I would say, from my own experience, the majority of companies, if we're talking specifically around human rights due diligence, are still a bit uncertain, and they're not really, don't really know quite where they might improve some of their things. And I was thinking about that sense of, you know, where you have a big rock and a whole lot of ants underneath it, and you don't want to disturb it because you know there are a few little ants trickling around because you don't know what's sitting under that colony. And I sense that for addressing human rights for confident companies is that, you know, they're not always honest about where the gaps are. They don't want to pick that rock up and see what's under it. And so, you know, I would urge more confident companies to really take a step back and be honest about your gaps around your decision making, around your board accountability. And I think that, you know, for confident companies, there is very much I think that requirement to look around board accountability and actual board skilling, because not many boards necessarily would have the kind of ESG skills that you might anticipate they should have, looking at this, how sustainability has developed over the last 20 years. So, you know, having the right roles and responsibilities in place and upskilling them, building your stakeholder engagement, which will stress test your system. You know, I think it's important to get those links, if you're confident, between what you're doing, what are your outcomes, what are your impacts, so that they are, you know, well documented, well understood. And then to focus on effectiveness, which is actually bringing together all of this. You know, effective systems have accountable boards, have accountable people within the business who are able with confidence also to raise their hand and say, I think we need to pick up that rock. So I think, you know, that isn't always possible, you know, depending on who's skilled. I mean, one of the things we also see is that there's, you know, this interaction between the lawyers, the sustainability people, the finance directors who may hold the resources for a human rights due diligence program. Some sustainability managers are intimidated by the lawyers, their general counsel. They don't quite know how to position themselves. So, you know, building effective communication and trust internally, I feel, is something that a lot of companies could maybe go away and think about, and looking at how they're embedding what their objectives are in those roles and responsibilities and the systems.
Lift those rocks. What a good way to think about it. Don't be frightened to lift those rocks, because if there's stuff under them, they're there whether you're looking or not, right? It's a really interesting way to think about things. I'm going to stop sharing actually, guys, so we can see you properly. If I can find my mouse, there we go. And so we're approaching actually the end of today's session. First of all, thank you very much indeed for everybody who joins us. If you haven't been able to join all sessions, then or if you have and you want to share with colleagues, then I just wanted to make a point before I thank our speakers. Few things here. We've had 4 sessions. As a registered delegate for these sessions, you will get free access to quite an interesting white paper around this series, which we will produce and share with you. We've also been taking written key takeaways from each of our sessions. So we will summarise those as a consolidated pack, and we will make those available. You'll also have access to the 4 recorded sessions, so we will make those available to you. And also, I asked the teams if they were comfortable with this, both Bureau Veritas and Ardea International. We do offer, as a thank you for joining our sessions, you're able to book a 30-minute complimentary session with either Colleen's team or Myresh or David's team. If you're listening, you have questions, you want to test some ideas, we make that available to you, and we will let you know after the session today how you can contact us there. But I think, you know, in close, it's a really important topic that we're talking about. It's been an absolute pleasure, Colleen and Rory, we work together anyway. It's been super to have you on these 4 sessions and really hear that through the, you know, the next level up from where, you know, Bureau Veritas are the test, the inspect, the certification business, very strong, very good at that. But actually your expertise layered around and on top of that has been super interesting. So, you know, we thank you for your time to join these sessions. And of course, you know, Myresh, you joined us. We saved the best till last, I think, with bringing you into session 4. Myresh is one of our principal consultants here in the UK. It's been super to get your views on things. So the only other thing to say is we don't want a full stop here. You know, we want to stay in contact. So in around September or October, we'll look to bring together all of our panel in a single session, and we're going to reflect a little bit actually on your feedback, the items that we've talked about, and we would love to see you at that session also. And so we close. Any questions after today, let us know. I apologise, my marketing lady has told me there is a question. Let me load that up. My question isn't loading. Colleen, can you see that?
Yeah, I can see it, and I'm happy to take it. The question is saying, if a business is looking to go beyond audit to highlight human rights risks that might not be flagged within audits, example situations where business compliance approach is more established and supplier compliance is strong, what one topic, area or project would you recommend that a business focus on first? Rory, I think you've got some thoughts about this if you want to come in and then perhaps I can add something to what you're going to say.
Yeah,
Great
definitely.
question.
I think yeah, it's a brilliant question. And I would say more so than looking at it as a topic area to focus on, looking at it from a project standpoint, if you want to go beyond what, you know, looking into what might not be flagged by audits. One thing that we've found to be really effective is focusing a bit more on worker voice and worker engagement. So really understanding the conditions in a workplace from the perspective of the people affected, because we've seen examples where you know, there's particular human rights risks that haven't been flagged in audits, and actually some quite shocking practices around recruitment practices, overtime and payment of workers, where workers haven't felt comfortable raising concerns. So I think as a practical first step to go beyond audit would be to start strengthening that worker engagement, whether that's through interviews or anonymous surveys or improving your grievance mechanisms. We've seen that really strengthen the approach to go beyond just auditing.
And if I can just add to that, if that's okay, Vicky.
Yeah, we have time.
I also,
sure.
I mean, you know, I'm not if you haven't done a salient human rights assessment following a double materiality, I think that's something you should consider, because that will also help highlight the bigger risks to the business and where you might then want to focus that kind of effort that Rory is speaking about in different regions. I would also add that aligned to that engagement point that Rory has made is that actually we developed a social management compliance system for a particular factory, particular area for a US owned business, which is aligned to the terminology we've used today, which is plan, do, act, check. I always get the last bits wrong, and is also aligned to the EU compliance requirements for CS3D. And we use that as an engagement tool once the initial engagement with worker voice was done at this particular factory, as a means of bringing that particular workforce, you know, engaging them more, helping them improve some of the practices, but then also improving the governance side from the parent company to be able to get the data and the information that they also needed to show that there was improvements. But happy to take that offline. There's a lot we can talk about in that particular example.
And there is a tool, isn't there, Colleen, that you guys have developed that maybe we could share, almost like the self-assessment sort of tool that maybe we could share after the session today. Perhaps we'll pop that on our list.
Yeah, thank you. We have a human rights due diligence maturity or readiness assessment that's free on the website, but we also undertake a structured human rights due diligence maturity gap analysis or checklist, which can also help a business stand back, look at its maturity levels, and then from that decide where its gaps are and how it might prioritize some of the actions. Because the other area, of course, could be you want to be looking in a deeper dive in your own procurement, not necessarily just in your supply chain.
Super. Guys, we could stay here for another 10 sessions, I'm sure, but we have to close. Thank you to our audience for joining us. We hope you've found the sessions useful, and we look forward to continuing those discussions. to our expert speaker panel, our gratitude for your time and sharing those thoughts from your experience. Look out for the wrap-up packs. Any questions, let us know, and we'll make sure that you can understand how to contact us, and hope to see you around September, October for the wider session.
Yes,
Stay safe,
thank
everybody,
you, Vicky,
and see
for
you
your
next time.
excellent moderation over the 4 sessions. Been a pleasure.
Thank you, Vicky.
Welcome.
Thank you.